like you're working with to advance racial equity by reaching with white males. Is that what I understood?
Yes, it's become very complicated to talk about because if you say white males, they
Yeah.
run for the doors.
Yeah, white women too. I know.
Well, white women run the other way. They run towards you like, "Oh, I'm not that. I'm gonna help. It'll be all fine." And men, our number one defense is to eject. We detach and leave.
Okay. I work with white women who are inclined to advance racial equity over 40 years old because that's when they're in a place where they've got some time and energy and resources to throw at it.
That's status,
But
right?
but their biggest sphere of influence is the white men who are in position of power because they'll hear things from us, they won't hear from black women.
Right.
And so help us understand the mindset of the white men who, when you say that, run, and
Right.
how what approaches work and what don't.
Right. That's perfect. Yeah, we'll have a good conversation about that. You're right. We're in very, very, very similar spaces,
Mhm.
and this should be good. But how is your business doing?
My business is doing really well, honestly. I just picked up a wonderful contract for a global company in Georgia, but we don't call it DEI anymore.
Right.
Right. We went old school to what I've done for 30 years, culture and communications, and just respect for people. And that encompasses all of it. And I guess because I think I retired before DEI even really hit the scene. How's your business?
Terrible.
Oh, tell me. Tell me what
Well,
happened.
I've had, I was working mostly with Fortune 100 companies, so they're
Mhm.
pretty high visibility. And
Uh-huh.
the last one, 2 weeks ago, called me and just said, we just can't do it. We're going to have to stop working. I was doing a leadership development program with all of their mid-level leaders. And
Right.
and they just were like, there's just too much risk. They went into my website and they said, we appreciate the changes to the website, but your blogs and everything about your approach, if somebody really wants to find it, can. And frankly, we don't want you to change what you're doing because what you're doing is the right way to do it. We just can't afford to take the exposure.
Wow. Well,
And
that
that's
could end
mostly
up.
what I hear from people. So,
Yeah.
So
Ooh.
it's a conundrum, do I mean, I've already, well, we can talk about it when we do it. How much do you morph to go with the political environment and how much do you stand strong with what you're doing,
Right. Right.
And frankly, this will be, I'll say this again, but one of the things that keeps me going is I have a really strong support group of people, mostly white women and women of color who are like, Jim, we need you. Keep going,
Yeah.
stay in it. Um,
Right.
so
Right.
anyway,
So one of the things that I did, I got off of meta platforms as all this started evolving. I got out of all the things that that quelched my voice,
right.
and went over to Substack. And I do find that there are people who are kind of in your position that may be able to find support and income stream there to weather this thing a little better. I don't know if you've looked at it yet or not.
I haven't, but that's encouraging. My wife and
Mhm.
I are actually in similar businesses, and she keeps on saying both of us for different reasons ought to look at your Substack. So
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It is it's a different playing field, and um it's I find it highly rewarding.
good, good. That's
Yeah,
great.
something to consider. So tell so tell me about you. Tell me about what it is about you that this work draws your heart. What's your big
Oh,
why?
that's let me see the short version of that story. Well, I've been doing leadership development and culture change, similar to
Mhm.
you, for a
Yeah.
long time. I'm not a credentialed or licensed OD practitioner, but I've been doing OD for 20 years. I've been very honest about what my background is. My background's mostly in education,
Yeah.
and I was a school principal, the leadership development stuff. And I was working for mission-driven organizations at the time, mostly focused on sustainability.
Mhm.
So, which is interesting because what tracking the things that they've been canceling. They've canceled ESG programs and they're canceling DEI programs. So the
Right.
two my two fields of expertise, they're trying to like, we don't need you. Um,
Uh,
but so I was doing that work, and then I attended a workshop on creating equity for people in general, for
mhm,
white, and it was focused for white men. And
mhm,
I went to it, and it was like a spear through the heart. It's like, this is really what I ought to be doing. This is what makes sense to me. Because we've got to find a way to reconcile differences, to manage and understand our biases, and to understand what discrimination looks like so that we can intervene on ourselves. And it was
mhm,
really the thing that was really clear to me at the very beginning was that the group of people who have the responsibility in the United States for eliminating racism and sexism are, particularly racism, are white people.
yes.
It's not, I'm sure you would, this resonates with you. It's not the job of people of color to advocate for themselves around stuff that's mostly being perpetuated by people that look like you and me. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is brilliant. I have no idea how to do it. So I spent the next 25 years figuring out what that looked like and how it worked. Um,
Okay.
yeah, that's why. Yeah.
And so how do you move them from wanting to push the exit button as soon as they hear that they might have some responsibility here? We're not talking about anything except look outside your little bubble to notice what's happening to the people around you. Just because you're comfortable in the white office doesn't mean that they're comfortable on the diverse floor.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's so many barriers to I'll say us white people.
Yeah.
There's so many barriers to us understanding how to do the work. And I think for me, the thing I keep on tapping into when I get people to tell me the truth about what their hesitancy or resistance is
Mhm.
shame.
Okay.
Like almost all of us, I think, not all of us, but many, maybe I should just say many of us have a story about discrimination that we've seen somebody being bullied or harassed or treated poorly that we didn't say something. I've got several of those stories throughout my, I grew up in Virginia where at the time when they were trying to integrate high schools and stuff. So I saw a lot of that kind of thing. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't say anything frequently. I would watch it and be uncomfortable with it. So I think and when more and more when I talk to people that are the kind of the resistors, they have a story of shame. They have a story of being told that it's their fault and they're bad for that. And I think that scar tissue I think stays with us, you know.
Right.
So then you and I show up in a system to try and do our work, and they're like, okay, this is so familiar to what I've had before. So
Mhm.
for me, the big thing is trying to create an environment which say, listen, shame is not what we're after here. And I think one of the problems is, and one of the reasons that we're seeing the big backlash is, I frankly I think some practitioners have used shame as a motivator. Yeah,
Mhm.
so I don't know about you, but I've ended up in systems where they were like, what are you going to do with this exactly? Because we don't want everybody feeling terrible about themselves as a result of you working with us,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so I go into it with an awareness about people feeling afraid and shamed. And
Mhm.
the other thing for me is, and I'd be curious to hear what you do about this, but I think it's really important to figure out what's the enlightened self-interest of everybody in the group. So it's like for example, it's not just about, white women helping people that have been racialized or minoritized, but what's in it for white women to keep on
Yes.
doing this work? What's personally important for them? Same with
Right.
white men. Yeah.
Right. And so the question, I got a lot of my training from Dr. Nikki Lanier, and she does the Rare Woman Collective, and it's been a wonderful resource for me. But when one of the questions she asked, the first question she asked me was, "What has racism cost you?"
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, and I had to really, because I wasn't exposed. I was raised in a white bubble. I wasn't really exposed until later on. I always wondered if I was adopted because my family really did look like Archie Bunker. Okay. But I wasn't that way. But I had to sneak if I wanted to have a black friend. I had to really sneak the older I got. And so, and so what it cost me when I could get down to what it cost me in lost relationships, in lost trust, but mostly in the recognition that the people who hurt me in my life were not the people those white people warned me about. It
Mhm.
was those white people. Mm. When I got that on an emotional level, heart to heart, it shifted. It's like finding out, it's like a betrayal. It's like finding out your husband was unfaithful. Now you go back through your life, click, 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 and re-examine everything. That's what happened for me. So when I
Right.
work with white women, I try to bring it into their personal. What's in it? What is it costing you? Because then you can identify what's in it for me to solve this problem.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it is what is it costing you? And, you know, we, most of us have been brought up, I think, in an environment where we are insulated from really looking at what those costs are because we're brought up in a structure that has a lot of denial in it.
Yeah.
You know, everything's fine for all of us, and we all want to love one another. And that's the story. Without actually getting into all the ways that's not playing out. And that's not a promise that that's kept for everyone, you know.
Well, and that shame, the best defense is a good offense. When I start to feel any cultural or historical shame, if I say, why don't you just work harder? I'm not privileged. I was raised lower middle class. I had to work for anything. Had a newspaper route when I was 12, whatever it was. And then we push back and we support the system we don't even know we're supporting
Right.
to keep a one up, one down position.
Yep. And that's systemic. That's one of the things that helps people understand my clients is that when you talk about a system of discrimination, part of it is that it reinforces itself and we're not even aware of it.
Right.
You know, so systems reinforce themselves and they have the ability to favor that which keeps the system in play.
Mhm.
Right. And so that becomes really at that level, all of a sudden it becomes pretty heady and it's hard for people to understand that connection between empathy and systemic change.
Yes.
Right. So it's a stretch. There's a lot of work there. And I love what you're saying about it, though. It's like it's really important to take this personally, I think. So the one we want people to feel it personally. We want them to have an empathetic response. I love all the work that people are doing on empathy right now. It's so central to what you and I are doing. You know,
Hmm.
we're not asking people uh, to solve a problem as much as sometimes we're asking them to feel what it might feel like to not be them, and what it might feel like for us to intervene with ourselves and each other, and how we support creating a world that works for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes, particularly in this climate, the people that you are trying to educate are people in your own household or in your own extended family. At what point, I mean, I've heard everything from the drip method, leave it on the back of the toilet kind of thing, to full-on confrontation. What works? What doesn't work? What have we tried and failed at that we could quit trying again?
What works and what doesn't work. Well, again, to me, the biggest thing is what you've already covered, which is the enlightened self-interest. And I love the question of saying, what's it cost you? What does the current system cost you? And what would it feel and be like if it was different? The other thing I think that really works is to get there's a misnomer in the work, and I see this happen with a lot of organizations who want to bring in somebody from a minority group and say, tell us about your lived experience so that we all get it, and that will help us do something.
Right.
Right. And I understand the desire to do that. And there are, of course, a lot of really skilled practitioners that would love to come talk more about their lived experience because it's rich, it's powerful, it's sad, it's traumatic,
Mhm.
it's rich in opportunities for learning. But that doesn't create an opportunity for what do we do next, right?
Yeah.
So people come in and they go that they become devastated by what they're hearing and what they're seeing. I actually think what's really important is and I kind of I'm not saying you need to agree with this, but I'm curious what you think. Is like, I think it's really important for us to do work inside each group. I mean, men and women of color will tell you they've got their own work to do with
Yep.
each other and how
Mhm.
to deal with a system of oppression where it creates a lot of competition.
Mhm.
But I think white men we clearly have our own work to do. And the
Right.
statistics, the stuff that Richard Reeves is doing now, there's so much that shows that white men in this country are kind of in trouble, right? I mean, we're
Mhm.
not keeping up, or we're not keeping up in terms of job promotion and escalation of work. We're not keeping up in terms of our mental health. We have the highest rate of suicide for any demographic, blah, blah,
mhm,
blah. There's just lots of information that says, oh, our current way of doing things is not working for white men, but
right.
we just soldier on as if it's
Mhm,
all going to be okay. And I think the solution to that is to have white men working with other white men. So white
right.
men who have maybe had that spear through the chest in terms of understanding racial equity and why it's so important and what
Mhm,
they do to make it work so that
mhm,
other men can say, well, I can model that. I can learn from that. We don't,
right.
we like, most of us were brought up so kind of rugged individualist that
Mhm,
it's really hard for us to think about what it might be like to work collaboratively, particularly with other men, particularly with other
right.
white men around how we do this work.
Mhm,
So if you can get that group in the room for 45 minutes and
mhm,
remind them you're not going to try and make them feel like they're the lowest form of life on the planet,
right.
you can make some progress. But you
Yeah.
got to get them in the room and complicate it.
So,
And I'll say one more thing about it, and this gets to what your work is like most of the time my clients, the white men that I coach or work with, most of the time they were sponsored or supported to show up because of a white woman.
seriously. So in my work in culture and communications, when I executive coach white men who are sometimes a tough nut to crack, by the time we're finished with the work, more than one time, their wives have come into me afterwards and thanked me because it made their home life so much better. Because, oh my gosh, they learned how to listen so people would speak
Wow,
and
that's
not
awesome.
be and not center everything on themselves, basically, which is exactly what the Black community is saying to white women. Don't center yourself in this conversation. Do your work. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I did work for a number of years with a big defense contractor, working with them around creating better leadership and equity in all dimensions.
Mhm.
And they did a longitudinal study to understand more about the efficacy of the work. And one of the biggest surprises was that almost all of the respondents reported having better relationships at home because of the work.
That's
And I,
good.
yeah, and I think it's that right there. I think it's
That's
that,
good.
yeah,
Yeah. I think that's great.
yeah.
So I know that culture change is a 1 to 2 year process in an organization. You spend the first year laying the groundwork, and I do it in quarters, right? This quarter we're going to deal with the executive team. This quarter we're doing this. This quarter I might move it through. The second year is the sustainability year, where you put the internal things in place. But how do you come out of the gate, you with white men, to make a safe place?
Um, by all the techniques that both of us probably learned in coaching is like on the one hand you want to be disclosive and reveal that you're a learner along with them.
Mhm. Yeah,
That's really important. It's not to say I'm an expert and I'm going to tell you how to do all of it because I've got it wired, but
right.
to say this is what I'm learning and these are the mistakes I've made. Part of
Mhm.
it is we've got to learn to be okay with making mistakes. There's a culture of perfectionism around white supremacy
Mhm.
that's really dangerous. And most of us were brought up in it. So we want to do it right,
Right.
particularly if we're talking about,
Right.
something that has a moral overtone, like how we
Mhm.
treat people.
Mhm.
We want to do it right. We don't want to take a chance and do it wrong. So instead of doing anything, we do nothing until we can do it perfectly. So getting people to understand that, and part of that is by helping them understand how to make repairs.
Mhm.
So not to say I'm sorry, but to say, hey, I own that,
Yeah.
and I've learned something from this, and I'm going to be able to do it differently. But we are so afraid of making mistakes. We don't want to be called racist. We don't want to be called sexist. We don't want to be
Mhm.
called any of the labels. So
Mhm.
instead of doing something, we do nothing. I call it leading from a crouched position. So we keep our heads down, and if we're working with a woman, for example, and we think there's a performance issue, sometimes we soft pedal that performance feedback
Right.
because we don't want to be seen as being sexist,
Mhm.
and we just tend to soft pedal all over the place. So part of it for me is really helping people start looking at some of those behaviors and patterns. And I do use myself as an example, and I use the data as an example. The
Mhm.
other thing that's really interesting for me is, I was brought up solid middle class. My dad worked at the Smithsonian. And
Okay.
so, and he was in charge of cultural programs. So I learned about African culture, I learned about Caribbean culture and Indian culture. I learned about all these cultures. The one thing I never thought of until I was in my late 40s was that white men have a culture.
Mm,
And it's all around us. We know, we understand it, we see it, we feel it, we know how to conform to it, but we never actually name it. So to me, part of it is saying, let's explore what, if there is such a thing as white male culture, and I leave that as an open question, what might be the components of white male culture? And you do the flip chart exercise where people free associate and you put it up on the chart. And we say, and then we look at it and say, what themes are coming out? And almost always the same themes come out. Rugged individualism over collaboration.
mhm,
Status and rank is more important than connection, not personally, but in terms of us surviving. So those sorts of things show time is linear and future focused. We're always looking at what's next. We never look behind.
mhm.
Those sorts of things all show up. And all of a sudden, the men in the room start going, okay, so some of this is the operating system under which I've always behaved.
Yeah.
And then, you probably have your own way of talking about this. I say, so let's examine the operating system and what updates would you like to make to it,
Oh, I like that.
right?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah. Is that
it
similar or
is.
different to your approach?
Yeah, it is. I'm just fascinated at how and I'm fascinated because I'm right in the middle of the work. I am right in the middle of it right now. And how white supremacy isn't limited to white bodies.
Right. Yep.
And if we just understand that it's not that you're a racist, but that we all are steeped in racism in this country by design. So that even if we get the C-suite on board and they're ready to, be egalitarian across the board, we've got the underpinnings of it pushing back from the lower levels going, no, that's not comfortable. That's not the way we were raised.
Yep. Yep, I've seen the same thing. And when in big change processes, I'm curious if you've seen this. At some point, there's almost if things are moving along in culture transformation, and you're going through the first year of the senior team engagement, and then you're trying to kind of go for critical mass in the second
Mhm.
year and that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Um, at some point in that second year, for me, it's usually a little longer than that. At some point in that process, there's a small revolt, and the revolt is led by white women and men and women of color and other minoritized groups saying, "Why are we doing all this work on DEI? Because I don't think we need to keep. We're really pushing this too hard on the white guys. It's not all their thing. We got to
mhm,
lighten up." And I think what's happening there, I'm curious what you think. I think what's happening is they've figured out how to be successful in that system.
yep,
And now we're unfreezing all the ice cubes and
right,
everything's changing.
right. The
Yeah,
devil
go
you
ahead.
know.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Is that right? You see
yeah.
that too?
I say the same thing, and it's usually for me, it's usually mid-management
Yep.
is where it happens. And that's the places where they've achieved a level of distance from the disparity and they aspire to be at the top level and they think they've got a shot if we don't change the game right now. But the minute you give everybody a level playing field and equal voice and equal respect, regardless of where they are in the food chain, well, that just upsets the whole system for the ones who aren't quite there but aren't back there yet.
Yep. And they're saying, hey, just stop changing everything. The system may not be fair, but I know how to work it.
Yes. Yeah. And I actually heard it. The game we played the game. One place I went called it drinking the Kool-Aid. So it
Right.
depends. You can tell you how long I've been doing this. Oh yeah, they're drinking the Kool-Aid. Now it's we play the game. But the
Yeah.
game, you want to talk about rigged. The game is rigged, but it's rigged against all of you, not just some of you. So
Right.
you who have made it to the office, who think you've got the windows, and that somehow makes you immune or protected, it's the same thing that white women learned this last election cycle. Being silent does not keep you safe.
Right.
But we always thought it
They
would.
learn that.
Hmm?
Yeah. I hope they learn that.
Well, some of them did.
Yeah.
Some of them
Yeah.
did. So how when you come into a place, I'm just gonna say I'm a little bit fascinated by this conversation, and it could be that there's a place for us to collaborate in corporate America in the very near future, since your business is dropping down and my business is picking up. And there are people there who would far better hear it from a white male voice than a white female voice
Right? Yeah.
that I have
Yeah.
just, discovered. So it might be that building community around this in these troubled times might be a conversation worth having off screen.
Yeah, again, to me, the hook is if you've got them working on culture, let's say let's really examine what culture. Let's examine the operating system by which this organization works.
Mhm.
And I try and not use white supremacy or white male
Yep.
supremacy. I try not to use those terms because again,
Yep.
they're trigger terms, and it's like that
Mhm.
sends people back to where their scar tissue is.
Right.
But just and you know, I loved your point about uh, there's a supremacy system in place that really impacts people. I try not to use that too much, but I do talk about the fact that in every culture there are people. Part of how people divide is who are you better than and who are you not as good as. So to
Right.
me, that leads to a conversation around insiders and outsiders. So I use that dialogic approach, right? So we have insiders and outsiders. The goal of inclusion is to create an environment where the outsiders don't have to effort so hard to fit in,
Oh, I like that.
right?
Yeah.
Because that's what's happening is, and
Right.
that's one of the value propositions of DEI is that when we're doing the work well, the people that are underrepresented in the group or the people who feel like outsiders don't have to hustle to fit
Mhm.
in and be seen as credible. They can just do their job, which means you're going to get better performance out of everybody, right?
Right.
So the
Yeah.
goal here is to increase organizational effectiveness and performance, and you do that by making it so that it's not so hard for people to do their jobs,
Mhm.
right? By dealing with this outsider insider dynamic. And nobody rejects that idea, right?
Right.
Because everybody can viscerally say, well, I know what it feels like to be an outsider because I've traveled internationally, or, you know,
Right.
I'm on a team with all women and I'm the only man. So they know what that feels like. They just don't understand how to use it.
Right. Right.
So that's how I usually start. I use that framework to get going.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. When you talked about perfectionism in the culture and the perfectionism, and I think about the white creator, the black creators that I know, black women particularly, who have to, who can have all the degrees and all the advanced education and all of the, and they're just not quite a good fit for the job.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Or, but now I also see it, I see it in black men who have risen to certain levels of responsibility in an organization, but they really have a heads down kind of approach of their perfection is don't make waves. It's almost a mediary kind of a position. Do you see that at all where you
You
are?
with black men?
Yeah, yeah. In that in that white culture that is, we do things perfectly or we don't do them at all. So we don't use our voice until we can do it right. Part of what I do is teach women how to do it right? Um, so that they don't have to feel the shame of making a mistake and getting called out or understanding that it's okay to be called out. But if you come up through generational trauma and one down positions that black and brown people have in many cases, their ceiling, they're not about to hit their head on that ceiling and take as many risks once they hit a level of.
Right. No, I don't count on people from underrepresented groups to be the spokespeople for change. I don't.
Right.
I mean, think in
Good.
general, I just don't do, yeah, because it's again, we're overtasking them, you know, and they're
Yep.
exhausted. They're
Yeah.
really, they'll report being exhausted from that. So I try not to count on them when they show up, when they either show up with resistance or they show up with allyship and they want to support what's happening. You know, again, to me, it's always about, well, what's in this for you, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes with them, I will use white male culture. And I said, you know, you've learned to be really successful in this culture. How much have you had to modify your approach to do that? And all of them go, oh man, let me tell you how much I do to pass. They'll say
Yeah.
pass, right? How
Yeah.
much I do to pass. Like, well, what would it be like to actually work in a system where you didn't have to pass? And they're like, I don't even know what that might feel like. I don't even know how that might work. And
Yeah.
so to me, and if I'm using generic language and I'm in an environment where people aren't going to react to it too badly, I'll say, well, we've all learned to do white male culture, right?
Hmm.
So that's the behavioral norm by which everybody is measured. So we
Yeah.
all have to learn it. And sometimes the people who aren't white males do white male culture better than the white guys do.
Because they have to. You have to
Because you
study
have to.
it. Yeah.
Right. Right. So I've got an undergraduate degree in education and I'm working with PhD level people. I can pull that off because of my skin color and age and my
Yes.
gender,
Yeah.
right? Where the people I'm working with frequently, like you probably have 5 times as many certifications. You're probably certifiable. I am not
I'm
certifiable, right? But I get by just on charisma and
Yeah.
whiteness, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's just not fair.
Yeah. Yeah. It is the nature of the beast. Now, so you work with corporations. Do you work with small groups or privately with people, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, the one part of my business that stayed fairly, I wouldn't say it's not great, but I've still got a number of clients, all of whom are under extremely tight NDAs around
Hmm.
helping them understand, and they're white men, understanding more about how to manage uh, improving their culture in the absence of being able to call it DEI.
Hmm. Okay.
So they want coaching on that. And of course, they want me to come, they always hire me to come in and help them work on their company.
Yeah.
And I actually, and through, yeah, you know where I'm going to go. I say, well, the company's going to do whatever you help do. So let's figure out
Yeah.
what your role is
Yeah.
and make it very personal. So you have to kind of ease them into that. But
Right.
it's been great. It's been really good. We are hungry. We're tired of being alone. We're tired of
Yeah.
working so hard. We're tired of faking it to make it.
Yeah.
We're tired of having to feel like we have to do it perfectly.
Yeah.
We're tired of being afraid.
Hmm.
So if if I said that to a group of white men, most of the time they would go, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
Because we've just adapted.
Yeah.
We've suppressed whatever those feelings are. But if we can get past that point, and usually in coaching you can, because of
Hmm.
that intimate one-on-one relationship, it's
Yeah.
been really powerful. And at some point, almost always, I know my work is done because they're like, hey, I think I got this. Look, give me a month and I want to go off and I'll be back.
Yeah.
And so then they call me and say, let's schedule some more time. I'm ready, right?
Yeah.
So once they open up their hearts a little bit,
Hmm.
once they kind of, one man said, I feel like I've been cracked open.
Hmm.
And he meant that as a positive thing. He's like, I'm seeing stuff and feeling stuff I haven't thought about. And then they need time to go work on that
Yeah.
and to see what that looks like. And almost always the next step is to work with their teams. Because
Hmm.
when they start talking about what they've discovered with the
Yeah.
people they work with, regardless of what group they're from, the team looks at them kind of quizzically and says, what's happened to you?
Hmm.
And that transformation can be very fast.
Yeah.
It's not like somebody has to apprentice themselves to us for years to become
Right.
aware of what they've been missing.
Yeah.
They just start seeing everything through different lenses.
Hmm.
And once that happens, the change can be really fast. And that's part of what I try and say to clients is like, this is not going to be some arduous multi-year process that's going to feel like psychotherapy.
Hmm.
It's not like that. These are going to be a series of conversations that help you look at the world in a slightly different way.
Right.
And when that happens, it's great.
Hmm. You just want to change their mind because where the mind goes, the body follows.
Right.
Once they see it differently, then they express differently and they can communicate differently.
And really, I even say that a little differently, Kim. I say, this is an opportunity for you to examine your mindsets and which ones serve you and which ones don't.
Mhm.
I'm not going to change your mind. My job is not to change your mind. My job is to make sure you're seeing all the different ways the world can be looked at.
Yeah.
You're looking at it through a series of lenses. I'm going to give you another pair of glasses. And then you can decide what you want to do with that.
Yep. Good. Good.
Yeah.
So, Jim, I want to talk for just a minute about the demographic shift in the United States in the working world. I don't know how well versed you are. I'm assuming we're on the same page there too,
I feel like I'm too immersed in it sometimes.
Okay,
I
so
was just watching the news.
my 50,000 foot view is that, by the year 2045, the majority of working Americans are going to be black and brown. and that is what's fueling this rebound knee jerk, oh my God, we're being left behind, discriminated against, losing power, whatever this is that's happening. Most people, most the working worlds I'm in, most people are not even aware of the 2045 imperative.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, they're not. They're not. Even when I try to explain to them about in your business, the reason for inclusivity is so that you can survive 40 more years,
Wow.
right?
Right.
Because if those black and brown people are not solidly middle class, which means that we've got pay differences that have to be addressed, we've got equity, lots of things, then it's a business imperative, and it sets the United States up for an apartheid state. If you have white people fighting to be in power over who are the minority over that black financial income base, then it's a problem. But that was what I saw, and to try to have that conversation with people who don't get that. Then some of the other creators in social media were saying, white men are afraid that they're going to be treated the way they've treated minorities in the past. But that again makes it personal and intentional and offensive, right? So how would you frame that? Or how do you frame that to have that
Well,
conversation?
I think you're spot on with I mean, the demographics are what they are.
Yeah.
And, and I keep on saying to people like, listen, the train's going to Cleveland. It's not, we're not going to change the direction of the train,
Uh-huh.
right? There are macroeconomic and there are macrobiologic dynamics at place around what's happening with our population.
Mhm.
So if the train's going to Cleveland, what do you want to do about it? Now, I actually think, I don't know what you think, but I actually think what we're seeing is an extended version of the resistance to minority rule.
Yes.
Right. I think that all of the election results and everything else is a backlash to a fear about that exact demographic.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to take more radical action to stay in charge, to stay in control. And it's not going to change. I mean, the history, the human record on this is pretty indelibly printed that the dominant group is going to change, even if
Mm-hmm.
even if it's even if they're in charge and even if they're the numerical majority. If there's enough dissatisfaction with what's happening, there will
Mm-hmm.
be a cultural or call it a revolution, call it a transformation, call it a change. We're in the middle of that, and I think what we're seeing is a lot of resistance to a lot of denial, really, to
Mm-hmm.
what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's a complicated conversation to have with people. At usually executive level, senior team members understand that intellectually. I don't think they sometimes understand what their role could be to deal with that.
Right.
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 And people are incredibly, I think right now in the country, people are so uncomfortable. I don't think anybody's in favor of the polarization that we have.
Mm-hmm.
I think the us and themism is a reaction to not knowing what else to do.
Right.
And I think we're still seeing a backlash to George Floyd. We're still seeing a backlash to
Mm-hmm.
Barack Obama, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not that they did it, it wasn't their fault, but these
Right.
are all cultural events that really created a tectonic shift that we're trying to pay attention to. And
Mm-hmm.
some of us are like, let's embrace that and let's move forward with that. And some are people like, well, this is the reason we need to hold on to what we've got.
Right.
So, for me, I think of our work as kind of change management,
Mm-hmm.
organizational development, and equity, right? Those three things. And this is a change management issue. So what do you do in systems where people are resistant to change? And to me, those answers, the answers that we use for that and any other dynamic play the same way out as they do when you talk about equity. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you've got to get people comfortable with understanding their self-interest. You've got to show them the numbers and what can happen with it. And the truth is, if we create a culture that works for everyone, the
Yeah.
dominant group is going to have to make some concessions,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we got to find a way to get honest about talking about that
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying, oh, we're going to make everybody's going to become more equal and it's going to be fine. You're not going to feel it at all. That's not true. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to feel it, and we might feel it economically in one way, but spiritually, emotionally, and all those other humanistic ways, I think we're going to find it feels better.
Right. Right. Yeah. I
And some
think,
of that, I think, you probably want to edit this part out, but some of it I think also gets to, we've got to examine pay inequities and wealth
absolutely.
inequities.
Mhm.
I mean, underneath, I think one of the things that's going on underneath all of this is let's see if we can change the population to get comfortable with more of an authoritarian approach
Right.
so that we can maintain the status quo,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
is, 1,000 people in the United States control 98% of all the money.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
And so I, I don't know what's happened with your business or when it happened, but as I'm going now into settings in this political climate, so what happens at home doesn't stay at home, it follows your work. Well, now the political is personal everywhere you go. And so you don't know what burdens people are already carrying or what positions they're already trying to defend before they even come into the room where you want to break those conversations down. And the vibe that I'm getting this time is different than what I've had the other times that I've brought this to the C-suite, because the C-suite itself is divided, because they're not just even focused on the financial piece. It's like there's noise in the room. There's
Yeah.
noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you do about that?
Well, so far I've been losing sleep. It's what keeps me up at night. And I've continued to do what I do. I stay the course. When it gets hard, I've always just put my head down and do the next right thing. And the next right thing is to say the elephant in the living room is to put that on the table so we can all talk about it, the thing everybody knows and nobody's talking about. Now everybody's talking about everything, but they're not talking to each other about it. I'll get
Right.
I'll get 8 leaders in a room, and maybe you see this with men, and I've always done a mixed group, but you get 8 people in a room and you ask a difficult question, and there's a lot of side eye going on to see who's gonna take the risk first. But it's very different than what I've experienced in other
Yeah.
places or at other times.
Yeah. This is, I'm not completely satisfied with what I'm getting ready to say, but this is my current status on how I'm doing that is I really try and set up a thing where we talk about empathy, we talk about understanding, we talk about compassion, including self-compassion, and we talk about awareness. And we get everybody to agree that they want to work in an organization where they are seen as being human. And they don't have
Yes.
to be seen as being perfect. They can
Yeah.
be imperfect. They can make mistakes and not have it cost them everything. They don't
Mhm.
want to get hauled to HR for whatever they said, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of fear about that. So to me, part of it is to get everybody to look at the common ground of what we all want, and then to say, and we know that right now you are withholding information from each other because you're afraid of each other's judgment.
Yeah.
So let's take judgment off the table, and you're all
Mhm.
human beings, and you all want these fundamental same things.
Mhm.
How do we have a conversation about that? The good news is, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing lots of things, kind of like Braver Angels, but more modern versions of that. These dialogic processes about how to bridge difference. There's lots of good dialogic processes now. And so I
Mhm.
try and use them. So you put them in pairs, you
Mhm.
assign a level of confidentiality in the conversations they have, and then I lead them through a series of questions that
Mhm.
get them to start talking more honestly about what they think.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if they do that, it's so funny. It's like the room gets incredibly quiet and you could just feel the collective blood pressure go up. And then you do that exercise, and when
Yeah.
it works, after like 15 minutes, it's like
Yep.
somebody who came out of the dentist's office and nothing hurt, right?
Yes.
And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe we just did that.
Yeah.
And I'm still alive.
Yes. Yep.
So
Yeah.
that breakthrough to me is a really important part of the process. And that's, you got to take it, the CEO can't lead that themselves,
Yeah.
right? And the
Correct.
CEO actually has to be the person that models the most around, talking about those contentious and difficult issues.
Mhm.
So I love that, but boy, the courage, I mean, I understand why I'm not getting more work, and I have a lot of empathy for all these. The company that's most recently kind of let me go, that was, I think we were working with all of their middle management around these topics, all of them. And they were like, we have so many government contracts. We are just terrified at what will happen. And if they research you, they're going to know that we're just putting lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
So I
Wow.
get it and I understand. And they're really, I mean, I feel terrible for them because they're like, well, we're not sure. We were really making progress on this. Now what are we going to do? So,
Mhm.
part of my work now is to say, well, how can you protect your investment? Some of these companies have spent millions of dollars trying to help make organizational change happen in the ways that we're talking about.
Mhm.
So forget me or forget you, but what can they do to make sure that they don't lose ground on their culture
Mhm.
and use the moment of division to actually create even more of a better culture? I mean, people are in a lot of pain,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does it look like? What does the rest of the year look like for you?
Um, Geez, that's the hardest question you've asked. I'm really trying to stay in my spot in my sweet spot and continue to talk about and write about dialogic processes that help people bridge difference.
Mhm.
I'm actually really involved in thinking about and trying to call other practitioners like you into a conversation about what can we learn from what went wrong with DEI.
Yeah.
What's Instead of blaming it on the people that are DEI resistors, there's an
Mhm.
element of responsibility all of us need to take.
Yeah.
And I want us to look at that. I'm involved with an organization, a nonprofit trade organization that really supports DEI practitioners in general. And I'm trying to help advance the conversation around let's do some internal work on how
Mhm.
we work. And
Mhm.
of course, my big focus is let's find a way to create pedagogies that don't involve shame. We've got
Mhm.
to get past shame and we've got to stop using shame as a motivator because
Mhm.
it's deadly.
Mhm.
So I'm doing that. I'm hoping that people like you are saying, let's find ways to collaborate. I'm doing a lot more collaboration. I've
Mhm.
actually got more possibilities for collaboration right now in Europe than I do in the United States because Europe is,
Sure.
they're looking at what we're doing and going, whoo.
Yeah. Tap that talent. Yes.
But they love, I mean, our OD practice in the United States has evolved differently than in Europe, and we do offer some skills, I think, that they appreciate and they see
Mhm.
as being unique and different. So I'm doing that, and I'm hoping that just staying the course works. And I keep on listening to those voices, the people, like I said at the beginning, the people who are my biggest supporters are people like you or and frankly Black women
Mhm. Mhm.
who are not usually in charge of the system, but who are influential in where it goes. And they're like, we need to help our white guys, and this guy knows how to do that.
Right.
So I'm just counting on that and
Yeah.
doing what I can to support them. And fortunately, I have a very successful executive coach and
Mhm.
educator and interventionist who's my wife, and
Uh-huh.
she's carrying all the water right now. So
Love
that's,
it.
I'm like, do a good job, baby. Keep going. And she's incredibly supportive of what I'm doing.
That's
And that's
wonderful.
even been uncomfortable for me to admit as a white guy to say, so my wife is actually supporting me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but she
Well,
is, and thank God she is.
you know, in the battlefield, there's a time to go back to the infirmary and heal up so you could get strong enough to go back out. And that's not retreat, that's necessary.
Right.
And
Yeah,
it's
well, I
your
think it's so
turn.
funny. We always called those, you and I, we run retreats. How come we
Uh-huh.
don't call them advances?
I know, right?
We're not
I call them
retreating. We're actually
seasons of
showing clients
surrender.
how to go forward.
So I find that people don't move, they don't take action until the fear of where they are is, until the pain of where they are is greater than the fear of where they're going, right?
Right.
And I don't think we're going to see a shift in what's happening in our structure politically until the pain of where we are is greater than the fear of where we're going. And I see the pain points rising, but I see the fear rising too, which is what causes people well into DEI to back up because now they're afraid because of the government contracts or the whatever. Some of them, some of them were quick to jump off of DEI. And to me, that tells me more about their motivation and their intention
Right.
to
Yep.
check the federal box than anything else. Because
Yep.
the ones who have stayed the course, and I'm trusting for you that that's going to be the case, the ones that have stayed in the course not only come out the other side stronger and healthier and wealthier, but with integrity.
Right.
And it, just like any political upheaval in any time in history, your integrity is often the only thing you have at the other side. What's the story you want to tell about yourself? What's the story you want to tell yourself when this is all over? And let that be your guiding light and
Yep.
principle.
And yeah, I totally agree with you. And the companies that have gotten out of it were the companies that jumped in it because everybody else was. It was very performative.
Yeah.
And first one's in, first one's in, first one's out, you
Yeah.
know?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I don't even want to name them because I don't want to continue to fuel
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to create more targets for the people that are trying to take it down. But there's so many good companies and corporate boards that are
Mm-hmm.
standing bravely and strongly in their convictions.
Yes.
Yeah, and those are the companies I want to work with, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what I wished we would do as a practitioner community was get better at sniffing out who's trying to hire us for performative reasons.
Oh, yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, yeah,
Well, and
that's
that's why I retired. And I came out of retirement for this because it was authentic and it was real, and I could bring all of who I am to the table. Otherwise, I'm not doing it. I'm just
good.
not doing it. But it's, to me, it's the perk of being self-employed, or it's the perk of being self-employed over 50, when you get enough of your sense of who you are that it's not all about the paycheck anymore. You get to be more selective.
Well, I would give you more credit than that. I don't think it's just situational about your age and your background. It does, you know, your work, I can tell listening to you, you've done a lot of work on yourself.
Mm,
And your self-awareness and your emotional intelligence has gone up
yeah,
as a result of this work. And
100%.
so you're a walking, talking, advertisement for why we want to do this work because it's benefited you as an executive and it's benefited you as a human.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
And meeting you has been the highlight of my week. So tell me,
And you.
so our base is white women over 40 who are inclined to want to make a difference. And my question is, do you have any parting thoughts, comments, insights, and how do people reach out to you if they want to work with you as we close?
I'm pretty easy to find. There's the pitcher named Jim Morris, and then there's if you go Jim Morris and DEI, I show up. Um, But one thing is, I would just say I have a pretty big library of blogs and stuff on everything from leadership development and how leaders need to show up outside of DEI and inside of DEI,
Mhm.
and a lot of it's about just personal toolkits, and a lot of it's also about organizational and systemic change. So take a look at some of that, and call me and let's have a conversation and let's just talk, and that's really helpful. I'm not at this point. I'm not trying to. I've never actually been really good at selling me. I'm pretty good at talking about what's going on and how and what we can do as a partnership to kind of
Mhm.
create something different. So I'm big on partnerships, and sometimes those partnerships don't result in any financial transaction. It's just sharing
Mhm.
different points of view. So I don't sell. I just talk about what I do, and if they're interested in it and it makes sense, great. It's just me, right? It's just that I don't have a big organization behind me anymore. I don't want to do that. I've done that. I've, managed a global consulting network. But right now, in my career, I just want to go work with some partners like you who are doing good work, who make me feel good, frankly. It's like life's too short to have it all be arduous and difficult. Let's find the people that we like to work with who have different ideas and different views of the world to help us grow.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for your time today. I certainly appreciate it.